What the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network does is of vital importance to the LGBTQ community, a community of which I'm a part. The life that my wife and I get to lead is a direct result of the work of activists like those whose history is preserved and shared by LGBTQ-RAN. So it was my great privilege to be able to contribute to that work in some small way.
And to be honest with you, I love telling people about LGBT-RAN because many times people aren't familiar with it. And it's like, wow, this even exists, and and that it's a online exhibit, if you will. So very important.
The Oral Histories project is perhaps for me the most splendid aspect of the site itself, in that one can see pictures, read bios, go to the oral history itself. It's phenomenal. I don't know of another LGBTQ database that is as expansive as LGBTQ-RAN is. And that's beautiful. And it will only, I'm sure it will only continue to get better.
Something that I just really loved about my experience at LGBTQ-RAN is that they really work with you and your interests and what you think you would be valuable in offering to the network. And I had an amazing time with the people there who really made sure that my questions were being answered, that I was getting the experience that I needed for future career goals, future school goals. And they were just always really ready to help me in any way that they could.
Welcome, friends, to the closing gala celebration of the LGBTQ Religious Archive Network's Queering Our Roots campaign, celebrating our 20th anniversary. I'm Mark Bowman, LGBTQ-RAN Executive Director. As we contemplated earlier this year about how to mark this 20-year milestone, we decided to honor 5 representative elders of LGBTQ plus religious movements in the US over the past 5 decades, as well as to highlight the rich history that LGBTQ-RAN has gathered over the years.
Welcome, friends. I am Asati Tahimba Ford, LGBTQ-RAN Communications Coordinator, and I would first like to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge the traditional and ancestral territory of the Native peoples of the land on which we reside. We chose the theme, Queering Our Roots, for this 20th anniversary campaign to emphasize our core mission to recover and remember the voices and the stories of LGBTQ religious leaders from the past, but also to remind us that those roots in our past gave life and meaning to our present and to our future. We are shaping a legacy that will help us grow into a strong, visible, historical tradition.
We demonstrated this relationship between our past and our future by honoring the 5 elders in intergenerational dialogues with younger queer religious thinker activists. Those of you who watched any of these dialogues over the past 5 weeks will agree that the conversations were captivating, exhilarating, and exhilarated the richness of LGBTQ religious activism in thinking in the past as well as today. LGBTQ-RAN is pleased to add the recordings of these dialogues to our historical record.
In this closing gala today, you will get to see the highlights of this Queering Our Roots campaign. We will offer a short tribute to the 5 elders we are honoring in this campaign. We will listen to the words of challenge and promise from Rohr, Reverend Megan Rohr, who is a historian and the first trans bishop in a major US church tradition. You will all then have a chance to meet in small groups and to talk about your hopes and dreams for queering our roots.
Some of you here today are new to LGBTQ-RAN. LGBTQ-RAN is a unique online enterprise preserving the history of LGBTQ religious movements around the world. We encourage and support LGBTQ religious leaders and groups to donate their papers and records to repositories. And we provide extensive information about LGBTQ religious history on our website. If you've not been there, do check us out at www.lgbtqreligiousarchives.org. How did this innovative historical venture come into being and take shape 20 years ago? Here's a short video that gives you some stories and insights about the beginnings of LGBTQ-RAN.
Hello, congratulations to Mark and Carl and Doris and other staff for taking a good idea and making it an extremely useful resource for generations to come. Thank you for stalwart creativity. LGBTQ-RAN is the creation of new knowledge, which empowers.
What was groundbreaking about LGBTQ-RAN was that it was queer religious people who were doing the preserving and documenting of our own history, and doing so online.
There are now more than 350 collections in our collections catalog, and that number grows every week.
LGBTQ-RAN was an early innovator in creating online exhibits. LGBTQ-RAN is ensuring that future historians remember and recount our legacy. I have had a lifelong fascination with history. I have no formal credentials in history, but from a young age read historical accounts and biographies and took a number of history classes through my years of school. In the mid-1990s, I was directing the United Methodist Reconciling Movement. The board was doing strategic planning, and the facilitator hung a timeline on the wall and asked us to record events and people that had led us up to our present day. So I wrote down the names of my mentors: Paul Abels, Michael Collins, Joan Clark. I was shocked when most of the people in the room said, "Who are these persons?" Not even a generation had passed, and our LGBTQ Methodist forebears had been forgotten. So I resolved that someday, in some way, I would ensure that our history would be captured and remembered. In the year 2000, I was in the midst of vocational transition and recalled that earlier resolve. Living in Chicago, I approached Chicago Theological Seminary, known at the time for including LGBTQ studies in its curriculum. After a series of meetings with leaders there, we agreed to explore establishing an archives at the school. I secured a small grant to study some options for doing this and spent some months talking about this with a variety of LGBTQ religious scholars, historians, archivists, and activists. Responses from these conversations were, number one, yes, it's now time for an organized and concerted effort to record our history. And secondly, we don't need another physical repository. What we do need is a way to locate collections that are scattered around in different archives.
When I look back at the almost 20 years since I began work with LGBTQ-RAN, I'm reminded of how ahead of the curve the project was from the very beginning. Few archives even had all of their own finding aids on their website, and it was still a dream that a researcher could go to one search platform and search for collections across a number of archives.
I asked several scholars, archivists, and activists, Mary Hunt, Rebecca Alpert, Ken Rao, Joanne Brown, Jim Anderson, Bill Johnson, Frank Zarilli, Gordon Melton, to serve on an advisory team to shape this venture. They all said yes, which confirmed to me that the time to act had come.
From a technical perspective, the catalogs and histories and biographies and exhibits on the LGBTQ-RAN website weren't really unique or unusually difficult to do. There were other people on the web at the time who were creating the same kind of material. Instead, what was groundbreaking about LGBTQ-RAN was that it was queer religious people who were doing the preserving and documenting of our own history, and doing so online. We were adding ourselves to the record and to the public conversation, instead of depending upon often hostile cultural institutions to do so for us.
I only traveled occasionally to Hyde Park for staff meetings, but I attended ceremonies for the winners of the LGBTQ History Award, and I had the opportunity to meet members of the advisory board. These advisors were inspiring elders. They were the activists who had helped make the history that I was working to preserve.
Early questions we asked included how would we get people, many of whom were in dire danger, with significant consequences ahead for being out. They were in danger for putting themselves in the public arena. Religious groups in those days, and some still today, were rather unforgiving. Was it ever ethical to ask our queer siblings to make themselves vulnerable for all eternity? Some of the early people who were profiled became better known, more visible in death than they were in life. That's a public service, a form of justice making that the network engages in.
My job at LGBTQ-RAN was to create a collection catalog from which researchers could find collections pertinent to our topic. Another aspect of my role at LGBTQ-RAN was to encourage donors and advise them on how to donate their records. I was grateful that by the 2000s, archives across the country had really welcomed LGBTQ collections, and they were actively seeking to document the history of LGBTQ movements.
Our intention from the onset was to be inclusive of all spiritual traditions and expressions around the globe. We spent time grappling with the name before deciding on Religious Archives Network. While religious wasn't perfect, it best described our intent to be expansive. Amazing personnel have stepped up to propel this project forward. I asked a friend who worked in IT to help get the Archives Network off the ground. I quickly learned that Carl Foote is a technological wizard who could transform my ideas and images into electronic realities. Plus, he has a passion for our history. So much of LGBTQ-RAN's success over these 20 years is attributable to Carl's brilliant design and maintenance of our website.
It was a fortunate time for a project like LGBTQ-RAN. In the early 2000s, there was little information online about queer people, not much about religious life, and virtually nothing about living in both worlds. Interest in the public internet was exploding, and Google's approach to searching websites had really kicked in. We simply had to publish ourselves on a website, and people would find us. One lighthearted example from the era is that, aside from some salacious stories and fantasies, for a time the only factual information online about lesbian nuns was an oral history we had posted on our website. Just one page for the entire web. Needless to say, that page got a lot of attention for a while, and Google's algorithm was happy to let the entire world know it was there. I still think it's a significant accomplishment that, for a while, hundreds of thousands of people typed in lesbian nuns for all possible reasons and were sent to a website full of proud, queer, activist religious people, including a nun.
Our next venture was to collect biographical information. Our ever-expanding profiles gallery is the most visited part of our website. A Google search on the name of an LGBTQ religious activist usually lists the LGBTQ-RAN profile at the top of the search findings. And these profiles of our leaders have provided a valuable constituency and community to support our work.
I never thought about the internet being a location where you really could explore deeply questions that hadn't been looked at before and bring together pictures and ideas and thoughts and really make a museum online. I recommend that anybody who hasn't clicked on the exhibits page on the LGBTQ-RAN site to do so right now, because what you'll find there are amazing stories that aren't often told that really reveal the importance of what Mark and his colleagues have done and continue to do.
I honestly can't imagine work that is more fun and more fulfilling than this. I have been blessed to hear and read so many stories of courage and suffering and redemption. You can find all these on our website.
Every time I use the network website, whether for research or for teaching, I realize how little I know about the heroic and inspiring people in our field. I want to know more. Whoever imagined that we were so many, that we were so diverse, and who knew that we were so bold and so committed for so long? Thanks to the network, we know, we'll continue to know, and that energy will enliven us in generations to come in perpetuity. Thanks so very much.
Thank you, Irene, for that great video. As we reflect on the history of LGBTQ-RAN, I invite us all to pause just a moment to remember the lives of two dear LGBTQ-RAN friends who recently completed their earthly journeys. Kenneth E. Rao was the preeminent chronicler of Methodist history in our day. Yet, Ken was also passionate about preserving the history of persons on the margins of the church. Ken played an active role in the formation of LGBTQ-RAN, serving on our first advisory team and continuing that faithful support and counsel over the years. Ellie Charlton and her late partner, Jean Barnett, garnered national media attention with an extraordinary January 1999 wedding before 1,200 guests and with 95 clergy officiating. Ellie was committed to preserving our legacies and was a most generous benefactor of LGBTQ-RAN.
LGBTQ-RAN is an independent, not-for-profit corporation overseen by a board of directors. Here's our board member, Jim Matulski, to talk to you about the board's part in this Queering Our Roots campaign.
Hi, my name is Jim Matulski, and I'm a minister and ordained elder in the Metropolitan Community Churches. I'm a ordained minister, a bishop in the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, and also I'm a minister, a pastor in the United Church of Christ. I come to you today from Duluth, Minnesota, where I am the interim minister of the Peace United Church of Christ in Duluth. I am so proud to be a founding board member of LGBT-RAN and proud of the work that we do. And we're able to do it because of the dedicated work that you saw from the people who just made their testimonies about what drew them into their vision, about what LGBT-RAN could do. And we're also able to do it because of an amazing financial support that we receive from so many people. We don't have huge donor streams from one or two large donors, but we have a strong base of support from many, many donors who make regular commitments. Today, we have an opportunity to complete our 20th anniversary campaign because of a generous matching gift from one particular donor and many others who have contributed, including partners and allies, whom I'll acknowledge later in the program. But today, we are very close right now with $1,000 of reaching our goal of $20,000 for this campaign. We rely on your donations to do this work, to be an organization that runs in the black with a very shoestring budget and is able each year to expand the services we provide. I personally make a monthly gift of $125. I'm going to be specific because as a fundraiser and as a minister and as a pastor, I've learned there's nothing to be ashamed about being specific about money. And I make this gift I mean, I'm a pastor. I don't make a lot of money, but I invest in preserving the legacy and telling the story of the LGBT movement, the LGBTQ religious movement, because that's how strongly I believe in it. A monthly donation every month that sustains this work. You know, as a Metropolitan Community Church minister and as a TFAM minister, I'm not always accustomed to hearing these traditions honored and recognized and their place in the story accorded the proper weight that it deserves. LGBTQ-RAN, through the resources it provides, is the resource that scholars and historians can go to, not only to hear the famous stories or the mainline stories, but all the stories that have brought us this far in this movement. That's one reason why I'm so passionate about my own monthly commitment and why I make special gifts from time to time. I'm asking you to consider today helping us to go over that $20,000 mark. As I said, we're so close, within $1,000. You know, with the number of participants we have on right now, if every participant were able to give even a $20 gift in honor of the 20th anniversary, above and beyond what you've already provided, which we're very, very grateful for, that'll put us over the top. And while you're at it, consider making a monthly gift, because that's how we're able to grow. That's how we're able to sustain what we're doing and accomplish even more than we've been able to accomplish so far. So I hope you're going to enjoy the opportunity that you'll have shortly to hear from and about the pioneers that we're honoring. It's not a comprehensive list, but we did a pretty darn good job, I think, of finding 5 representatives of our important, groundbreaking work that actually changed the conversation among religious people about LGBTQ people. And we changed it. We didn't wait for studies to do it. We did it ourselves by being participants in our own liberation. And you can find that story and many other stories on and through LGBTQ-RAN and through the resources that we provide and that we network. So today, right now, if you can, go to giveq.org or go to our website or make a pledge in some other way. You have the opportunity to do it. So I hope you'll help put us over the top during this hour that we spend together celebrating our pioneers. We'll let you know before the end, but let me say this. If you've ever given a cent, or if you've ever prayed a single prayer for LGBTQ-RAN, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. And please continue those gifts and continue those prayers, and let's celebrate 20 years of accomplishment and many more years to come.
Thank you, Jim, and the board of directors for the just faithful, outstanding leadership you provide to guide the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network. LGBTQ-RAN is often contacted by persons wanting to send us their papers or records. We are not a physical repository that stores records and papers. Instead, we're an online resource center and information clearinghouse. However, we work closely with many archives to ensure that LGBTQ religious collections are preserved. Here is a short video that portrays how archives have been working with activists to preserve records that document our history.
Before the gay rights movement, queer people had no way to preserve and pass down their history and culture. We all but disappeared from written history. When LGBTQ people embraced pride as the symbol of their unity, one of the first things they did was to create LGBTQ archives that would honor their lives and cultures. In the United States, Jim Kepner organized one archive to house his personal collection. In Amsterdam, the International Homo Lesbian Information Center and Archive opened. On the other side of the world, Australia founded AGWA, that captured the many dimensions of LGBTQ life and culture.
Hello, my name's Tim Jones. I'm a historian and volunteer with the Australian Queer Archives. The Australian Queer Archives, or AQUA, has been collecting and preserving and celebrating Australia's queer history since 1978. Religious individuals, organisations and archives have been an important part of AQUA's history and form a growing part of our collection. Fabienne Lechavio's papers constitute one of the most important Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence collections internationally, documenting the Australian and a number of international houses up to the late 1990s.
Traditional archives were aligned with cultural power. Especially relevant were the denominational archives from the mainstream Christian traditions that many LGBTQ religious activists were rooted in. The Vatican archives were a symbol of magnificence that sought to glorify the church and enhance its cultural power. In the United States, the Congregational Church Library and Archive, like most church archives, did not initially seek out LGBTQ members or accept the records of the LGBTQ organizations within its church. The result was that the historical records of the LGBTQ religious movements were one-sided.
Welcome to the Mennonite Church USA Archives in Elkhart, Indiana. My name's Jason Kaufman, and I'm the Archives Director. MCUSA is a small Christian denomination with about 62,000 members in 500 plus congregations. The question of LGBTQ inclusion has been ongoing since at least the 1970s and has left a legacy of division, mistrust, and harm. We have a few small collections here from allies, but until recently we had no collections documenting the lives and experiences of LGBTQ Mennonites.
By 2000, LGBTQ groups within all faith traditions had been active for 20 or 30 years. They had accumulated boxes of records and files and scrapbooks that were no longer in active use. Records were being lost as volunteers left or secretaries moved on and took their files with them. When LGBTQ-RAN began its efforts to preserve our history, one of its first initiatives was to identify archives that were accepting LGBTQ collections. I'm happy to report that over the decades, archivists were changing the profession. By the mid-2010s, archivists were reaching out to historically marginalized groups in an effort to make right their historic negligence of non-mainstream perspectives and cultures. Church archives began to seek out the records of their LGBTQ organizations. The Methodist General Conference Archives now is actively gathering materials from groups that oppose the church's stance on LGBTQ inclusion, as well as accepting donations by activists and allies. Where records were not available, they funded oral history projects.
Then last year I got an email from Rachel Waltner-Goosen, a professor of history at Washburn University. She told me that she had around 30 oral histories that she had conducted for an article on the rise of LGBTQ leaders in the Mennonite Church. Would I be interested in accepting them for the Mennonite Church USA Archives? I was excited to accept the collection, but also worried about our ability to provide access to the interviews. Like many small archives, we simply don't have enough resources to provide online access to most of our collections. That's where the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network came in.
But some members were so alienated from the institutions of their faith tradition that they preferred to donate materials to LGBTQ archives or LGBTQ-friendly public archives. A milestone of LGBTQ religious history came in 2019.
This is Franklin Robinson, coming to you from the National Museum of American History Smithsonian Institution, where in 2019 we collected materials from the Metropolitan Community Church. This amazing donation adds to the amount of material that we have documenting the LGBTQ community, and one of the most important aspects of that, the spiritual aspect of the LGBTQ community.
As a community-based and community-funded archive project, LGBTQ-RAN has become a model for archives as we move into the era of digital archiving.
I'm grateful to Mark Bowman, Doris Malkmus, and the rest of the team at the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network for helping us provide better access and visibility. I wish you the very best and want to thank you for letting us be a small part of the amazing work that you're doing and that you have been doing for the last 20 years. Happy anniversary.
A key part of this Queering Our Roots campaign has been to honor 5 elders as representatives of the diversity and the many early leaders of the LGBTQ plus religious movements in the US. We honored each of the elders in an hour-long intergenerational dialogue with a young activist thinker this month. We encourage you to watch the recording of those fascinating conversations on our website. And today we will briefly honor each of those elders again and share a brief clip from their recorded conversations.
This vivacious Presbyterian pastor was forced to resign as head of the Oakland Council of Churches in 1980 because she was a lesbian. Immediately, the Reverend Dr. Jane Adams Spar plunged into ministry to the spiritual needs of LGBTQ persons and their families and friends. In her 3 years as Minister of Pastoral Care at MCC San Francisco, Janie stretched that congregation's outreach to women, persons with HIV/AIDS, and others. Janie played a pivotal role in founding Spectrum, an outreach to LGBTQ youth and families in Marin County, and served as executive director for more than 10 years. In November 1991, Janie was called as one of the co-pastors of Downtown Presbyterian Church in Rochester, New York. That call was turned down by Presbyterian authorities because of the church's ban on LGBTQ clergy at that time. The congregation then agreed to hire Janie as their evangelist to travel the country speaking on behalf of justice and inclusion for LGBTQ persons. For the next several years, Janie traveled tirelessly and spoke passionately to Presbyterians and other church groups. Others joined her in this ministry, which became known as That All May Freely Serve. The efforts of Janie and her colleagues eventually led the Presbyterian Church USA to overturn its policies and welcome LGBTQ clergy. Janie's passion, humor, spirit, and integrity have inspired so many persons over the years.
And I heard this speaker, if I were younger, I would help with the marginalized. I would do, and he started naming these litany of things. And I looked around and I felt like he was talking just to me. And so I thought to myself, I can do this. I can do this. You bet. I could be a Presbyterian minister. I never saw a woman minister. But I knew from the time I was 10 years old, this was it. And then at 14, at 18, whatever, every time when people say, what are you going to be? I was going to say, I'm going to be a Presbyterian minister. Once you hear that you're called, it's like, okay, God, let's do this thing, whatever this is. And so it just kept happening. When we didn't confess anymore and we just said, here we are, something happened to us. Here we are, now use us and meet us. And that's when the church began to change. So when people would say terrible things to me and to us, it was like keep loving them back. What we do as we become freer and freer, and as all our friends become freer and freer, then we let God be freer and freer. And being with people in the audience and so on like that is to make them comfortable. Because sexuality and spirituality, people don't see how they go together. So you're loving them and helping them, but through humor is the way to do it.
Jonathan Thunderword saw and responded to a need to provide support and education for Black, trans, and other marginalized communities at the onset of the AIDS epidemic in Virginia. Almost no one else was doing this, so Jonathan had to seek out resources and to care for the persons whose lives were devastated by this disease. Sensing these persons' needs for a spiritual home, Jonathan gathered them into a community that he pastored. Often limited in formal education settings because of his learning disabilities, Jonathan was persistent in seeking out opportunities for his own higher education and seminary training. Jonathan gradually affirmed his identity as a Black trans man and served as a leader and mentor for other Black trans men. Even as he continued to provide pastoral leadership for marginal communities, Jonathan emerged as a free thinker, exploring different spiritual traditions and writing and speaking about omni-faith as perhaps a more authentic spiritual path. Jonathan's remarkable life journey and his ability to thrive in the midst of adversity has been a beacon of hope to so many others.
Bravery, going out separate from the rest of the tribe, the great possibility that no one ever even know you're out there. At least for me, to go out from amongst my peers and do something totally different and to basically be separated and to go to a group of people and a call to people who don't even recognize you there to help them. The old gospel song, "May the work I do speak for me," has always been my motto. My first motto was always one person at a time. Without compassion, nothing else could stand. It's not enough just to go out and give a person a sandwich. To be able to go with people when there is no sandwich.
Right.
And to sit there in their hunger and say, I don't have a sandwich, but I can sit with you and we'll wait together for this sandwich.
Excuse me? A child survivor of the Holocaust, Evie Beck arrived in New York City at the age of 7. After completing her formal education, Evie set out to weave together both academia and activism in her life. She espoused making Yiddish language and literature a legitimate research focus. She was a founding member of the National Women's Studies Association. In light of her own emerging identity, in 1982, Beck published the groundbreaking Nice Jewish Girls, a Lesbian Anthology, a collection of poetry, essays, photographs, and short stories. The book was a rallying cry for Jewish lesbians and was denounced by many Jewish authorities. Beck taught for many years at the University of Maryland and played a significant role in making that campus a safe space for LGBTQ students. Beck's wide-ranging interests in ritual, feminism, psychotherapy, and arts have played out in diverse groups, such as Sisters of Fire, the Wild Beasts, the Creative Longevity and Wisdom Initiative. Evie participates in and leads sacred circle dancing. She recently marked the closing of a circle in her life as she returned to her hometown of Vienna, Austria, where she received an honorary doctorate from the University of Music and Performing Arts. Evie Beck is honored for her brilliant embodiment of the full range of human expression and thinking.
My earliest work in this was actually through Kafka and Yiddish. So my first book was Kafka and the Yiddish Theater, its impact on his work. But after I came out and did much more feminist work and lesbian research work, I realized that Kafka himself actually was gay. And that was one of my earliest sort of new contributions, besides Nice Jewish Girls, a Lesbian Anthology, which was my feels like the most important work I ever did, aside, it's scholarly in a very different kind of a way. It took the women's movement for me to come out as a woman. I became a feminist before I became a lesbian. So my entree into lesbian life was lesbian feminism. So I discovered there was anti-Semitism within the women's movement and within the lesbian movement. And that was the impetus for bringing together these two identities. And I think it's important for us to continue to bring forward Jewish lesbian, say that the word lesbian is being erased and disappeared, because I think it's like the equivalent of women being disappeared from a patriarchy. I think within the larger LGBTQ community, I think the word lesbian needs to be preserved. We can have a spectrum of names, but lesbian has to remain there. Otherwise, we'll be disappeared the way women get disappeared.
Carl Bean's faith and theology was shaped from a young age by renowned Black pastors Marcus Garvey Wood and Samuel DeWitt Proctor. Gifted with a booming singing voice, Bean performed in the gospel music recording world in New York and Chicago as a young adult. Even as his name and popularity grew, Carl felt deep inside that something was missing. So at age 28, he took a bus across country to Los Angeles to start over. He formed a new ensemble, Carl Bean and the Universal Love, in 1977, recorded the gay anthem, I Was Born This Way. Carl faithfully responded to God's call to ministry through studies leading to his ordination in 1982. He placed ads in the local African-American newspapers, inviting persons to Bible study in the home of an openly gay minister. This was the beginning of the Unity Fellowship of Christ Church. Carl saw the deep pain and isolation that AIDS brought to the Black gay male community, so he formed the Minority AIDS Project. Even as most Black churches turned their backs on persons with AIDS, Reverend Bean tirelessly worked to provide education and to bring comfort to these Black men and families. Archbishop Carl Bean's charismatic leadership and his bold proclamation that God's love and love is for everyone drew many persons to Unity Fellowship Church Christ churches in cities across the US. The Archbishop lovingly shepherded his community until his death last month. We honor Archbishop Carl Bean as the voice and embodiment of liberating Black love for Black men, women, siblings, and families over the past 4 decades.
I said, look, I'm doing this. I don't have a lot of research or anything like that to tell you. But I can tell you what it's like to be Black and homosexual and frightened. And the one institution you love turns its back on you. And I know that's what God has called me to do, is let them know that God hasn't turned his back on them. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't know what I'm going to do. Right now, I just visit hospitals and tell them God loves them. I hug them. I hold them. And I got a phone that they can call and I can talk to them. And people are responding. So that was that. I just counted a privilege to be able to tell people that Jesus is available to anyone and everyone who just say yes to him. And that's really it. It's very little to do with me and everything to do with God, who really is love. And my purpose is to live the love that God told me to demonstrate through the message that God is in fact love. And that's beyond personification. That's beyond male, female. But love, God really is love. And that really is available for everyone. And that transcends all categories, all theology, all churches, everything. It's just there and available for birds, bees, flowers. God is love, and love is healing, and it delivers.
Troy Perry was born to be a preacher. Licensed as a Baptist preacher as a teenager, Perry's meteoric preaching career came crashing down because of his homosexuality. He left Florida for a new start in Los Angeles, still carrying the torch of a preacher. After suffering a deep existential crisis, Troy became clear that LGBTQ persons needed a message of love and affirmation from God. He gathered 12 persons into his home for worship in October 1968. Reverend Perry's bold proclamation of God's love for LGBTQ persons spread quickly. The number of persons coming soon outgrew the capacity of his home, so they had to acquire a larger meeting space. Persons visited from other cities and took Perry's message back home to their friends. Reverend Perry's charismatic leadership drew other clergy to his fold and helped form the metropolitan community churches into a national and then international network. At one point, MCC was the largest LGBTQ organization in the world. Not content to be only a spiritual leader, Perry also understood that MCC should be on the forefront of advocating for justice for LGBTQ persons in society, a view not always shared by others in his churches. The Reverend Elder Troy Perry is honored for his unique constellation of gifts of preaching, teaching, leadership cultivation, organizational development, and public advocacy that have provided hope and possibility to countless LGBTQ persons of faith.
I am very proud of the fact, and I thank God every day for my founding metropolitan community churches. I also, being faithful to my call to ministry to the LGBTQ community that God called me to, both of those two things have meant more to me than I can ever tell. And I'm also thankful for my fight for marriage equality and my fight for human rights for these 53 years. That I was faithful and fearless in my work. I also am proud that And I thank God every day for our work in civil rights. I pray that we'll win all of our civil rights in the future, and that Metropolitan Community Church will continue to be faithful in its call to declare God's love to all people. We never lose that, I hope.
You're invited to watch the full recordings of the conversations with these 5 elders LGBTQ-RAN has honored in this Queering Our Roots campaign, and they are available on our website. We also extend our heartfelt gratitude to the emerging LGBTQ religious leaders who engaged in thoughtful and illuminating dialogue with these elders. We are so grateful to the young elders who are continuing the legacy. Please be sure to find their websites in the chat and stay connected to offer support to them as they continue to do the work for justice.
While we tend to think that historic events are those that happened in the past, we did recognize history happening in May of this year when the Reverend Megan Rohr was elected a bishop of the Sierra Pacific Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, a trans-identified bishop in a major church in the US. What a glorious delight. Bishop Rohr has a long-standing interest in LGBTQ religious history and has collaborated with LGBTQ-RAN in the past. We thought it appropriate to invite Bishop Rohr to speak to LGBTQ-RAN on the occasion of its 20th anniversary. Bishop Rohr is officiating at a church function at this time, so will speak to us in a pre-recorded message.
Hey everybody, I'm Bishop Megan Rohr from the Sierra Pacific Synod in the Lutheran Church, and today I'm here to thank you for being a supporter of the LGBTQ Religious Archive, and to say that people like me are able to be faithful witnesses and leaders out in the world because there is a place like LGBT-RAN who archive information, that there have been brave leaders in the church since as long as there have been churches. I know that I personally have gained strength from reading about the stories of those who have paved the way, those who were brave, those who were faithful, and those who followed the Holy Spirit even when there were consequences. Thank you for your support of this important work, and blessings on all that you are up to.
Thank you, Bishop Rohr, for those inspiring words. Now we'd like to hear from you. In a moment, everyone here will be sent into a breakout room, which will be hosted by a board member or one of our staff members. These groups will be set up randomly, but if you think that you not fit in that group and like to be placed in another group, you're more than welcome to leave that room and to just let us know to send you into a different room. The breakout time will only be 10 minutes, so we invite you to speak up and give everyone an opportunity to share in the space. We will convene back together after these breakout groups for a closing time together. So if you'll just be just a little patient with us, Irene and I will work to get you all into your breakout rooms in just a moment.
So I'm here to give just a quick campaign update. And Mark, have we gone over 20,000? Yes, we have. So thank you, all of you. This was not a miracle because we made it happen, but because of your generosity and your vision. So keep up the good work. I want to take just a moment and acknowledge quickly who our partners and allies were in this, as well as we had a list of individual donors that was about 30 people, and many of whom I checked in the chat, in the participants list, were present during this. So I can't read all of those people's names, but if you were here today and you were a donor, thank you, thank you, thank you for that. And then I just want to say this was like a roll call of the coolest religious organizations and archives, both partners. The partners were Affirmation, United Methodists, LGBTQ people and our allies, Bexley Seamery, Cathedral of Hope, church I'm a former pastor of, I'm very proud of them, Chicago Seminary, Chicago Theological Seminary, Church of the Covenant, Boston, Massachusetts, Beth Simchat Torah, Congregation Kol Ami, Dignity USA. This is Joel's organization, I think. Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, the Institute for Judaism, Sexual Orientation, and Gender, Sexuality. JQ International, Meadville Lombard Theological School, the Metropolitan Community Churches, More Light Presbyterians, National LGBTQ Task Force, the Northern California Nevada Conference of the United Church of Christ, the Reconciling Ministries Network, Resurrection Metropolitan Community Church in Houston, St. Paul's UCC in St. Paul, San Francisco Theological Seminary at the University of Redlands, Sojourn, the Southern Jewish Resource Network for Gender and Sexual Diversity, Union Theological Seminary, the United Church of Christ, and United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities, and also as our allies, the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies in Religion, CLGS, Eden Theological Seminary, Iliff School of Theology, MCC Boston, and Pacific School of Religion, and our archival allies. We are in this together, CLGS Archives Project, Riverside Church, and the Mennonite USA Archives. We did this together. We have met our goal, and I still want to encourage you, because I just can't help myself, make a monthly donation to LGBT-RAN, because that's what takes away the anxiety and helps us plan for the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim, for your impassioned invitation to give, and just for that acknowledgement for the LGBTQ-RAN. Is truly grateful for the generosity of all of our partners, allies, and friends. We can only carry out our mission with your support. We are deeply moved by the incredible generosity exhibited in the Queering Our Roots campaign. The board and staff members will be seriously conferring on how to use these additional financial resources in the coming years to more fully realize our mission to ensure that our voices and stories, all of our voices and stories, are preserved for future generations.
Thank you, thank you, thank you all so much for being with us today, and for the many ways you support and encourage LGBTQ-RAN. Our work is only as strong as our connections between us. Please be sure to follow us on social media and be on the lookout for our upcoming events. We are planning some great events for next year. Again, thank you all for celebrating this 20th anniversary with us. And if you would like to share words of greeting and gratitude with any of the elders or our young queer activist thinkers, please stick around after today's program ends, and you can meet and talk with them in a breakout room. And certainly I am wishing you all a wonderful evening, and I just cannot cannot say thank you enough for joining us for our 20th year and gala. And we just look forward to seeing you at our future events. Again, please be sure to follow us on Facebook or Instagram and just stay tuned to what we have coming up next. After this video, again, if you'd like to stick around to meet with any of our elders and or to meet with any of our young thinkers, please be sure to stay on with us.
The fact that so much has happened over such a long time, and to have it documented someplace where other people coming up can see it and not feel so alone and invisible, I think is extraordinary.
I value especially the intergenerational aspects. I certainly experienced that in St. Louis at that conference, but I think that's part of this great gift of history that is really, we have so many generations now. And also this, from the kind of onset, this deep commitment around many faiths, interfaith not, and continuing to expand that inclusion around race and culture and faith and all the interplay of that. So rich, and I can't imagine another religious archive that would even come close to doing that.
I've directed several students to the website and to the biographies for those who've been interested in doing research on queer history and religion. I also, for a while there seemed to be a focus on some like digital exhibits. There was one on the fire in the upstairs lounge that I found particularly good, and would love more things like that. That was composed really quite well. And then the other thing for me that's been helpful is just LGBTQ-RAN as a vehicle for really promoting this scholarship in religion and LGBTQ issues. There are not many places within the academy where that's happening, and this really fills that quite nicely.